invite to the stage Amos Gilad, the man who's behind the entire operation of the Herzliya conference, and he has a special announcement to make. Amos, please. It's not a very positive message. Regretfully, Brigadier General Dani Hagari, IDF spokesperson, has had to cancel his participation today. I was IDF spokesperson many years ago, and I think he's the best IDF spokesperson the IDF has ever had. He stands there all alone. He's a wonderful and amazing individual, personally a very modest man, an excellent combatant, the commander of the Naval Commando, and when they suggested a promotion, he said, no, I want to command this unit. He's very honest, he's very modest, he's exactly the kind of man we need here in Israel, and he's there at the forefront, and I said that we'll have a conversation between the IDF, between the spokesperson. I'll tell him that he's the best, and then he'll talk about what he does. But he won't be able to make it. That's what I wanted to announce. I don't think I should be, it's not right that I'm all alone here. I have my deputy, Hila, here with me, and an amazing team, people like Johnny Gershoni, who has expanded his activities, and Mickey Federman. We have amazing support systems here, and only this teamwork, as described by Professor Harel as an integral, as they call it in math. The integral is what deserves all the praise and gratitude. Thank you very much. I apologize, there were some last-minute changes to our schedule, so we're trying to adapt and adjust on the go. Now we're going to hold this session. The topic of the next session is terror as strategic factor. I'm honored to invite Professor Boaz Ganor, President of Reichman University. I'm also honored to invite Professor Assaf Moghadam, Dean of the Lauder School of Government, Diplomacy and Strategy from Reichman University as well. I'm honored to invite Colonel retired Miri, Managing Director of the International Institute for Counter-Terrorism, Reichman University, and I'm honored to invite Mr. Ofir Yehezkeli, Deputy Mayor of Kiryat, Shmona. Yes, he definitely deserves a lot of applause, definitely in this difficult period that Kiryat Shmona is going through. So your applause, please, and the session will be moderated by Dr. Dana Wolf, Head of the Law and Security Program, Head of Diplomacy and Conflict Studies track at the Reichman University. Thank you. Ofir is also a graduate of our department, so it's a great honor to have you with us today. Thank you all for coming and being with us today. So, Professor Ganor, with your permission, I'd like to begin with you. So, the horrific and sickening events of October 7th carried out against Israeli citizens, and it's important to say that continue to be conducted against 120 citizens held hostage by Hamas, were carried out by a genocidal, murderous organization. And this is what led to the Swords of Iron war, which is defined, its definition is the war on Hamas. You wrote a paper at the beginning of the war in which you said it's a misconception that follows yet another, the misconception of October 7th. What exactly do you mean by misconception? Look, first of all, we look at this war as a war that was initiated and carried out by Hamas. And I wish to argue that That's not exactly the case. The war that the State of Israel has found itself in the past 9 months is a war with a country, a state. This state is Iran. Iran, I wish to argue, planned, prepared, funded, initiated, and perhaps even more or less set the date or approximately the date a week earlier or later. And why did it do it? Iran had 3 reasons to start such a fierce war with the State of Israel. The first reason, the least important one, is revenge. The Iranians love to serve their revenge cold, and they have a lot to avenge from the past few years. I won't get into all the specifics. The second reason, much more important than the first one, because the Iranians have reached the critical stage of preparing their nuclear bombs, and they wanted global attention to shift from Tehran and Iran to the Middle East, and of course to focus on Israel. The third reason is actually the main reason, because the Iranians have one nightmare, and the nightmare which they wish to do everything in their power to prevent is the establishment of the second NATO pact against Iran. The first NATO pact was established to counter the Soviet Union. The second NATO pact will be an alliance between other countries, moderate Sunni countries, plus Israel, plus the US, plus perhaps some other countries. That's the greatest threat posed against them. They knew it was going to happen, and they knew that that was about to happen a short while after October 7th. A week or 2 or 3 weeks later, a normalization agreement would have been signed with Saudi Arabia, and that would have paved the way, paved the road for this NATO pact. And this is something they wanted to stop, and it could have been stopped only through a war, not yet another campaign in Gaza, but rather a war. But they wanted there to be 2 conditions for that war. They didn't want any Iranian signature. They wanted some space of denial. And another thing they wanted, they didn't want it to snowball in such a way that it would reach Iran and sabotage all their goals. And by the way, in order to create this deniability, they came up with a plan. They devised it in hours after the attack. Several spokespersons spoke. The first one was Hania. He said Iran isn't involved at all. It's all us. We don't expect any of them. And then on the Friday sermon the following week, Nasrallah said the same thing. No, we didn't know anything. And they were probably offended that nobody told them in advance. So this is why they're not joining the war. And then Khamenei said to the media, we aren't involved, but actually everything was premeditated and pre-planned, including the denial. So they are chess players. Chess, needless to say, is originally an Iranian game, and if you know how to play it, you don't just plan 1 step ahead, but 3 steps ahead. How do you plan it? Based on your estimate on what the opponent will do after every step you take. And I ask myself one question: what did the Iranians think that Israel would do once the war would begin, and what its next steps will be? Well, the answer to that is very simple. It's exactly what we did. That's the second misconception that followed the first. The first was before October 7th. The second misconception started on October 8th. We are playing into their hands exactly as they wanted it. They wanted a war of attrition. They wanted us to shed blood in Gaza. They wanted a war that would last for months, and that's what they get. With every day that passes, the Iranians are simply sitting back and enjoying the outcomes. So the question is, what should have been done? Well, we know, it's no secret, that there was an attempt led by Gantz in the first week of the war. There was a plan to target Hezbollah and to harm them significantly. The entire military system, mainly the political system, was against there, and it's completely bipartisan. It's both Bibi Netanyahu and Eisin and Gantz. All of them said no way. We can understand why. We don't need to blame them, because the Americans said no way. Had I been Prime Minister, I'd at the time, I would have focused all my energy on flying to the US and explaining to them that Hamas is merely a tactical threat on Israel. It was a tactical threat on October 6th, it's a tactical threat on the 7th, and it's a tactical threat today. While Hezbollah is a strategic threat and the state of Israel and Iran is an existential threat, we are shedding blood facing a tactical threat, and we're not addressing neither the strategic nor the existential threats. Anyone in the military, in the decision-maker echelon and the intel, do they share your view? I don't know if they all do, but as far as I know, not a lot of people share this thesis, not in the security establishment, not in the security establishments in plural, and not in the political echelon. And that's why the misconception that followed the misconception which I just described is even worse or more severe than the misconception of October 7th. Thank you. Professor Moghadam, following what we just heard from Professor Ganor, I'd like to ask you, in terrorism research, we have definitions of a hybrid organization that has a military branch and a civilian or a political branch, and Hamas is a very unique phenomenon that it has a third branch, and within that framework there's still some dispute whether Hamas is a strictly Iranian proxy, that it does what the Iranians ask it to do, or perhaps it has another vocation or mission. What do you think is Hamas's mission? Look, I think on the one hand it's correct to consider Hamas as a proxy, but I'm not sure that it's the most accurate conceptualization or nor the most important one. I agree with Boaz, even though I don't exactly know what's the scope of the Iranian intervention, and we heard it yesterday from Gadi Eisenkot, who talked about it indirectly, that Iran was involved in October 7th, and it also supports, I think, over $120 million a year of financial support, and this is a significant sum of money. Now, regarding Hamas as a proxy, I think that there are two issues here. First of all, this term of a sponsor and proxy, this term actually tries to say that the relations between a sponsor and a proxy are such that the proxy is supposed to serve the strategic interests of the sponsor, and it's indeed true, but I think it doesn't give sufficient credit to Hamas. I think that Hamas also has the agency, the ability to impact even to influence global events. It has either financial sources in addition to Iran. It has support in Gaza and in the West Bank. So that's one point. That's to consider Hamas merely a proxy, that's a problem. And I think that also this definition, this term, a proxy, it's a good framework, but not all proxies are the same. Hamas is a proxy, for example, is an Iranian proxy. They're a very different proxy in comparison to Hezbollah. The relations between Hamas and Iran are very different in comparison to the relations of Hezbollah and Iran. There aren't any, they don't share the same ideology. They're not Shiites. Hamas is a Sunni organization. We know that Iran will always fight until the very last Arab, and you know, thinking about Hamas, I think that viewing Hamas as a proxy of Iran, it's right, and it's important to do so, and it also has implications. If we view Hamas as a proxy of Iran, it means that on the one hand, we need to, some of our efforts need to detach the connection between Hamas and Iran, and another thing, we would need to focus on Iran as well. But I think that we also need to conceptualize Hamas in other ways, and this is what makes Hamas such a sophisticated actor, because they're very multidimensional. On the one hand, they're a proxy of Iran, and on the other hand, and that's no news, we all know this, it's a terror organization, and we need to fight against Hamas not just as an Iranian proxy, but also with the classic tools of fighting against a terror organization, special operations, to use intel pressure, and of course and also we need to view Hamas not just a terror organization, but also as a social and political movement, a type of insurgency even, and the problem here is the broad support, the extensive support of the people in Gaza, and the ramifications are that We need to fight against Hamas as a counterinsurgency to weaken the support of the people of Gaza, their support for Hamas. And another thing we need to consider them as a type of ideology and idea, a concept, and we heard about it this morning. So that adds another counter element that's on the information aspect or the counter narrative. So the war on Hamas, the campaign against Hamas is multidimensional, just as the organization is multidimensional. Thank you very much, Miri. You know, talking about multidimensionalism, we have noticed that one of the main characteristics of this war is the information terror warfare and the way that the terror organizations are using social media platforms in order to undermine Israel's legitimacy in the war. So this information war of Hamas, how does it impact Israel's ability to achieve the goals of the war? Has anybody traveled abroad recently? Well, that's the impact. We are in a period of 8.5 months that the success of the information war of Hamas is inconceivable. And Iran, which was mentioned here earlier, which heightens it and amplifies it with every possible mean. It's inconceivable for us how much this is amplified because we're sitting here in the Herzliya conference inside the state of Israel. But anybody who's traveled to the US, I'm not even talking about Europe yet, anybody who's traveled over the 8.5 months can see the influence. I had the privilege to sit on the stage at the ICT conference, and when I spoke there, I talked specifically about the topic of coolness of terrorism, TikTok terrorism. On October 7th, Hamas, in a very clearly planned way, they played on two parallel simultaneous narratives. The first one was intended to scare with immense terrorism the people of Israel, the state of Israel, supporter of Israel, because with all due respect, we're not that many. We are in our own echo chamber, and they do it through their echo chamber, and it's achieved through our echo chamber as well. We keep saying how they film themselves with their GoPros, but the narrative they streamed outside was very different, and it's based on information wars spanning 25 years and the delegitimization of Israel, and beyond that, the dehumanization of Israel. We're not human beings, so they can commit all the atrocities of October 7th because we're not even people. We're not human beings. They can take the hostages, and they don't consider them as human beings. They are tickets to negotiate. It's not Ben Hirsch. He's simply a card they can play with to achieve what they want. And the gap, the difference between how we see it in Israel and how it functions outside, I think that in our response, in our view, I mean, we think that obviously we're right, but in the information warfare of the past 25 years, they even stole the concepts from us, the concepts of justice, morality, who is good, and what has happened over the past 8.5 months, and it's exacerbating, it's constantly escalating, it's not being reduced. Israel is the bad one, and they're doing the bad things, and when we operate against Hezbollah, will be bad, and when we do whether we do or do act against Hezbollah, we're the bad guys. And because this all is founded on delegitimization and this terrible anti-Semitism, eruption of anti-Semitism, yay, here we are, 2024. Now, Iran is the queen in our story. It knows how to apply it, how to talk about it. Khamenei, during the Hajj last week, there was a Hajj in Saudi Arabia, and Khamenei issued a statement that the Hajj, and he said that in his Twitter in English. He has excellent Twitter, and he says the Hajj represents all the oppressed in the world, and what Hamas now represents is the voice of the oppressed. There's nothing more affiliated with the Shiites than the status of being the worst oppressed on earth, and the Palestinians, and within the Palestinians, Hamas, they are are fully found themselves in the spot of the oppressed. Who's the oppressor? We are the oppressed, the occupied. All of these terms, which are terms of freedom, justice, liberty, these things that are supposed to be positive, it all worked against us. And of course, what Israel does to counter that exacerbates, because if you don't know, we're in the right, they're in the wrong, and only if we explain this better, and Miri says this in her excellent English, but there's a framing of a humanitarian language that we don't speak correctly, and the information warfare becomes much more difficult. Thank you. Deputy Mayor of Kiryat Shmona, Mr. Ofir Yehezkeli, thank you for being with us. Let's talk about things, that are happening out there. Another strategic element is the way terrorism is impacting the civilian population. You come from Kiryat Shmona, your family has been evacuated to Jerusalem. This is something you experience daily. Could you explain to us how terrorism actually impacts the civilian population? Thank you, Dana. First of all, thank you for inviting me. It's always wonderful to return to your alma mater. I studied here for my undergraduate and graduate degree, and I was head of the student union for 2 years, so it's great to be back. But with your permission, let's talk about the northern border, and let's speak, from what's happening in the field. I slept last night in Kiryat Shmona, and I got up in the morning. I wanted to drive here, and I turned on Waze. What happens when you operate Waze in Kiryat Shmona? It says that I'm in Beirut, and unfortunately, that's the feeling of the people of Kiryat Shmona and the Galilee Panhandle over the past 8.5 months. The feeling is that the government of Israel has completely dissociated itself from this situation, and I think the reality is that the problem is that you and the majority of the people of Israel simply don't understand the extent of the damage happening in that place, because to try and describe this in sentences, or the fact that the city is abandoned and the traffic lights are yellow and everybody speeds and it's deserted, to try and describe that in words, okay, that's nice, but when you can't really see it with your eyes, it's a problem. Metula, 100 homes have been hit, and yesterday 2 members of the rapid response squad were injured. They wanted to take people whose house was hit. After their house was hit, the family wanted to see what's left, so they accompanied them, and they were injured from anti-tank missiles, and it's a matter of 40 or 50 centimeters that they simply wouldn't be alive anymore. To see Kiryat Shmona, we're talking about almost 500 calls that opened up in property tax for people who received direct damage and collateral damage. To see your city in such a situation, it's heartbreaking. And what bothers us, what concerns us about this, that we feel that there's only one side that's a part of this war. Hezbollah does whatever it wants. When it wants to launch anti-tank missiles, it does so. When it wants to launch missiles, it launches missiles. When it wants to send drones, they send drones. Another example, the holiday of Shavuot Tabernacles, our friends from Neot Mordechai, which is a kibbutz 6 kilometers from the border, they haven't been evacuated. There are several kibbutzim that haven't been evacuated yet, and they held a festive evening at Shavuot, and in the middle of the evening, they launched rockets and missiles at them. They had to rush to the shelters, and that was an excellent demonstration. And a week after that, all of a sudden, there was nothing, no drones, no sirens, nothing in the north. What happened? It's their holiday, it's their Eid, it's called the victims' holiday. We're the victims in this case. And where's the IDF? Why isn't the IDF targeting them? And look, strategically, I understand what they're saying is we don't want to open a second front in Israel. We're now busy in the south. Because what happened? They took 60, 70,000 people. They evacuated us from our homes so that 9 or 10 million people can continue to live their lives. Because once you pass the Moghadam junction and you reach Rosh Pina, or definitely when you come here to Herzliya, people are carrying on, they're living their lives normally as if nothing has happened. But we have to pay the price price for that, and there is a price tag to that. First of all, it's our own civilian price. The children that their entire school year went down the drain. Regarding the elderly, there is an increase, a 20% increase in mortality of senior citizens because they were taken out of their homes, and relationships, marriages. Think how long you can spend, with your wife in a hotel room and the entire family. The children, welfare families, businesses. Just think about the shops and the businesses that are closed and shut down. Think about people who earned a certain salary, but now it's been slashed by 50% because they're on furlough and they do receive unemployment and they don't receive an unemployment benefit. So there's a very heavy civilian price, and we are paying this price day in, day out. And in addition to that, I have to say, and you know what, let's say that, okay, we understand and we're willing to pay the price. I think we've now moved to a point that the price we're paying is a strategic price, because I think that anybody, Hezbollah in Lebanon, they have this nice habit when somebody is killed, they show a picture of a shaheed. They have excellent graphic designers and branding, and it says the shaheed is on his way to Jerusalem. That's exactly the view of this organization. It's not to conquer the Galilee. It's not our points of dispute with Lebanon. This is their ideology, their concept of conquering Jerusalem, and we are the human shield. If we give up on Metula, Kiryat, Shmona, Dishon, Kibbutz Amir, Margaliot, you guys are next. You here in Herzliya, you're next, Right now we've given up on this region, and that's why I first of all think that people don't really understand what's happening out there, both strategically and practically, and I think we need to see what's happening. And everybody's talking about Hezbollah. Excuse me? But where's the state of Lebanon? Lebanon is a country, a sovereign country that is harming us, that is targeting us, a sovereign country. They're harming this region for 8 months. Okay, there was a surprise, but here it's almost 9 months of a daily war of attrition. This situation cannot continue. There are several things happening here simultaneously. Right now I'm hearing about an agreement, whether they'll reach an agreement or not. I think that in this situation, we have to know that at the end of the situation, let me remind you what Nasrallah said at the end of the Second Lebanon War. He said, I wouldn't have started this, I wouldn't have abducted, kidnapped the soldiers had I known that these would be the results, the price that Lebanon would pay for that war. And we need to come back, and Hezbollah should know that it's going to cost them. They're going to pay a heavy price, both Hezbollah and the state of Lebanon, so that we can look at our residents in the eyes, to the children and their parents, and to tell them it's safe to now go back and live there. And let me remind you something else. Let me remind you what Churchill said before the Munich Agreement. He said you had the option to choose between war and disgrace. You chose disgrace, and then you got a war. And this is what's going to happen here. If we finish this event with a ridiculous agreement, and they'll say, they should distance themselves according to a certain UN resolution, we'll find ourselves in a pickle, in a problem. 2 or 3 years from now, we'll always feel that one day we'll wake up to October 7th, and I'm not willing to pay that price. We grew up in Kiryat Shmona. We were used to Katyushas every several weeks, and we were used to border infiltrations, but I'm not willing to live in a reality of the Radwan forces on the border, and we might experience October 7th at any given moment in the north. The state of Israel needs to understand this situation, get a grip, and come up with solutions to regain deterrence, to regain security, and especially to bring us back home.
Thank you, Professor Ganor. You hear these remarks. We understand the severity of both sides, and 120 hostages that have to come home now, today. The Northern Front is ruining the lives of our northern residents, and then there's Iranian strategy. What should Israel be doing First of all, Ofir is a dear friend of mine, used to be a student of mine, is now a colleague. And I always supported him and I support him still, and I'm very, very proud that in this time he is fulfilling this very important role. But I think, Ofir, you need to understand the situation. You said two things. Israel should bring solutions. Of course, Israel should bring solutions. Great. The government of Israel should have solutions. Yes, the government. But I would caution you, you and your colleagues, that you don't push the state of Israel to a war now with the Hezbollah, because you have to understand the implications of this, and you surely see that I'm not against a war against the Hezbollah. I think we should have opened a war against the Hezbollah on October 8th, but now, after 8 months, and I won't go into all of the reasons why not, I don't think it's now the interest of the state of Israel to open another front on the north, because the significance of that will be that what you experience today, what the North has experienced today, will be nothing compared to what the North will undergo with such a war. What the North is undergoing now, it's what the center of Israel will experience for a very long time, because if the war in Gaza is taking 9 months, the war on the northern front against the Hezbollah will take a lot longer. And this will not resolve our problem unless we have an agreement anyway. So, we should now already think of solutions, because solutions do rely on a deal, completely different deployment and use of the IDF, and completely different ideation of how we address the northern threat. And we talked about this long before this particular war, about how unsafe people in the north are. This must change, and there must be budgets, and we have to bring a lot more IDF presence in the north, because we shouldn't only rely on a written agreement. We should have a written agreement, but we shouldn't only rely on it. Israel, in my view, needs time, and it first has to provide a solution for the hostages immediately first, and concurrently we have to have a resolution in our southern border. Let's see what it entails, what problems in the south entails. Sinwar says from day one that he wants only one thing for the hostages he took. He wants a ceasefire. He wants a retreat of Israeli forces. You agree, you don't agree, think whatever you want. But Sinwar hasn't changed his stance. And we say that he constantly invents up new things. No, he's been insisting on that. The state of Israel has to decide, is it within its interests or not? I believe even without the hostages, it is in our interest. But certainly with the hostages, we have to conclude this war and prepare now for the real war, the strategic existential war, which is Hezbollah and Iran. And that war, I believe, sadly, is inevitable, but this is not the time to do it. Thank you. Professor Moghadam, what do you think that Israel should do right now? This is a complex question, but I think the agenda should be first to bring back the hostages. I agree that the time has come to move forward to concluding this war. First of all, that we have a government that can lead, and a government that can make decisions, and a government that can also set strategic goals and can pursue them. The second thing that we need, and that has to do to your previous question in regards to the threat, which is a multi-front threat. I think the state of Israel should work with partners. I think we have to have an agreement in Gaza and also with the Hezbollah. In order to do that, Israel had to make every effort to promote its strategic alliances, particularly first and foremost with the US. I know I sound a bit like Anmos right now. And next, I think that we have to get out of our mental fixation and think of solutions that are out of the box, creative, and that also includes that I think decision-making here in Israel, and we also heard this yesterday in the conference, we need, in our decision-making process as a country, we need more diversity, more women, for example. I think diversity of opinions among the decision-making tables is critical. We don't have a long time, so summary remarks. What does Israel need to do now? Abandon group thinking, and we are so deep into our groupthink mentality, and we've done so since October 7. But we have to think I mean, everything we thought about until October 7, we have to, you know, we should stay the same, but only they should rethink things. No, we have to rethink everything, meaning reconceptualization of our status. And for that, we need Assaf to talk about diversity and many more. And we need to hear other voices and other experts, because as we've heard in the last 2 days, we are lacking real diversity of opinion in order to leave this groupthink mentality. Ofir, I mean, if the government of Israel comes to an agreement in order to buy time, for us in Kiryat Shmona, we will go back to the north, we will rehabilitate our city, we will work together in real leadership and with real management. If there's an agreement, we need massive military presence. For that, we need budgets as well in order to address all of our civil problem, because we need amazing quality of life and quality of life in terms of education, welfare, infrastructure, the whole bit. But mostly, we need leadership. We are showing a lot of resilience. We're showing a lot of strength. The day will come when you'll come to visit us up in the north again. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Thank you all. In just a moment, we'll allow them to set up the stage for our next session. And I'd like now to invite to the stage for a one-on-one interview Tal Shalev, political correspondent in Walla News. Yes, round of applause, please, of course. And I'd like to invite to the stage Knesset member Avigdor Lieberman, head of the Israel Beitenu party and former Minister of Defense. If you could both come.